Hello students, welcome back to Let Us Master English. Students, this is my final video on modals. In this video, we are going to recapitulate all modal verbs, that is can, could, may, might, shall, should, will, would, must, ought to, dare, need, have to, has to, had to, and used to. So let's get started. Students, first of all, let us see what are modals. Modals are also known as modal verbs, modal auxiliary verbs, or modal auxiliaries. They are special verbs which behave irregularly in English. They are different from the normal verbs like read, write, cook, etc. Modal verbs give us additional information about the function of the main verb, that is the principal verb that follows it. Modal verbs add a meaning to the main verb by expressing possibility, ability, permission, or obligation. They have a great variety of communicative functions. Now, first of all, let us understand the difference between a normal verb and a modal verb. Now, students, see this sentence, I speak English. I speak English. Here, speak is the verb. And what does this sentence convey? I am telling you that मैं English बोलती हूँ. Now, let us add a modal verb before speak. Then the sentence becomes I can speak English. मतलब मैं English बोल सकती हूँ. So here by adding the modal verb can, what am I doing? I am telling you my ability that I am able to speak English. I have the capacity to speak English. तो यहाँ पे मैं आपको अपनी काबिलियत बता रही हूँ. So after adding can, the meaning changes. Let us see one more example. You should speak English. Now here we have added modal verb should before the normal verb speak. Now here by adding should, I am advising you that you should speak English. आपको English बोलनी चाहिए. So students, when we add a modal verb, so modal verbs add a meaning to the main verb. And what do they express? They express possibility, ability, permission, or obligation. Modal verbs express the mode or manner of actions denoted by the verbs. So here, the modal verbs, they tell you about the mood of the speaker. What does the speaker desire? Whether the speaker is making an offer, whether the speaker is seeking permission or giving permission, whether he is telling you about his ability, whether he is talking about any possibility. For example, I would listen to old film songs for hours. So here the speaker is telling you about his old habit of listening to old film songs for hours. We should do our duty. So once again, the speaker is telling us about our moral obligation. Now students, let us see how do we use modal verbs. Modal auxiliaries are used along with main verbs. They are not used alone. For example, he can lift this heavy box easily. So here he is the subject, can is the modal verb, and lift is the main verb. तो modal verb जो होती है वो हमेशा main verb से पहले आती है. Let us see one more example. They must leave now. So here they is the subject, must is the modal verb, and leave is the main verb. So students, this is how we frame sentences using modal verbs. First the subject, then the modal verb, and after that the main verb or the principal verb. Now students, here is a list of modals for you. So here you can see 3 columns. In first column, modal verb is there. In second column, it's negative. And in the third column, it's contracted form. So we can convert the sentence into negative by adding not after the modal verb. And when we are adding not after the modal verb, we can write it in the contracted form. For example, can is the modal verb, its negative is cannot, and its contracted form is can't. Same way could, could not, couldn't, may not, and we don't write contracted form of may not. Might not, and the contracted form is mightn't. Shall not, shan't. Should not, shouldn't. Will not, won't. Would not, wouldn't. Ought to, ought not to, oughtn't to. Dare not, daren't. Need not, needn't. Now students, let us see uses of modals. Now here I am going to tell you some very important properties of modals, and if you keep these points in your mind, you will not write the sentence incorrectly. You know how to use modal verb. Point number 1, a modal does not change according to the number or person of the subject. See students, in tenses you have learned that when we change the number, that is singular to plural, or person, first person, second person, third person, then the verb changes. For example, I say, I play, he plays, they play, she plays, I am playing, you are playing, he is playing. But here, when you are using a modal verb, it does not change according to the number or person. For all the pronouns, modal verb remains the same. For example, I can drive, we can drive, you can drive, he can drive, they can drive. So here we have changed the pronouns from singular to plural. We have changed the person, first person, second person, third person, but the modal verb remains the same. Second point, only the first form of the verb can be used after a modal auxiliary. For example, they can play football. So here can is the modal verb, play is first form of verb. She should obey her teachers. Should is the modal verb, obey first form of verb. I will win the competition. Will is the modal verb and win first form of verb. It might rain. So here might is the modal verb and rain is the main verb, which is in first form. So students, whenever we are using a modal verb, first form of verb should follow. But if after the modal we have used have, then you have to use third form of verb. Point number 3, modals can be used alone in response to a question. So students, earlier I told you that modal verbs cannot be used alone, but when you are giving response to a question, if somebody is asking you a question and you are responding to that question, in that case, you may use modal verb alone. For example, can you complete this assignment? I can. Will you play cricket? I will. May I borrow your dictionary? You can or you may. So here we can use modal verbs alone. Point number 4, modals when joined with not to form a negative can be contracted. So this thing we have seen in the table also. Examples, we cannot sing. It can also be written as we can't sing. You should not smoke. Can also be written as You shouldn't smoke. Now students, let us see some characteristics of modal verbs. Modal verbs never change their form. You can't add s, ed or ing. Don't change them in present, past or future. For example, she can play the piano beautifully. This is the correct sentence. You cannot write it as she can play the piano beautifully or she can playing the piano beautifully. This is totally wrong. They are always followed by an infinitive without to. That is first form of verb, bare infinitive. Only ought to is an exception to this rule. It does require to infinitive but otherwise behaves like other modal verbs. Example, they must work on the project. So if you write they must to work on the project, this is wrong because modal verb is followed by bare infinitive. Use not after modals to make negative sentences. Don't use don't, doesn't, isn't, aren't, hasn't, haven't, etc. Only the exception is have to, where you have to use don't have to. For example, it might not rain. So for framing negative sentence after the modal verb, we can directly insert not. If you write it don't might rain, then it is wrong. They never combine with another modal verbs. For example, he might come today. If you write he will might come today is wrong. So modal verbs are used to express certainty, possibility, willingness, obligation, necessity or ability. Now students, let us learn about can. Can is a modal verb which expresses ability to do something in the present. For example, I can speak English. मैं इंग्लिश बोल सकती हूँ. तो जो सेंटेंसेस में सकता हूँ, सकती हूँ, सो आ जाए तो वहां पे हम कैन यूज करते हैं बिकॉज इट टेल्स अस अबाउट द एबिलिटी. नंबर 2, परमिशन टू डू समथिंग इन द प्रेजेंट एंड इट इज यूज्ड इन informal way. For example, can I go for playing in the park? Number 3, request. Example, can you wait a moment please? क्या आप एक मोमेंट के लिए रुक सकते हैं? So here we are making request. Offer, for example, I can lend you my car till tomorrow. तो यहाँ हम सामने वाले के सामने ऑफर रख रहे हैं कि कल तक मैं आपको अपनी कार यूज करने के लिए दे सकता हूं. सजेशन, फॉर एग्जाम्पल, कैन वी विजिट ग्रैंडमा एट द वीकेंड? एंड कैन इज ऑल्सो यूज्ड फॉर पॉसिबिलिटी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, एनीवन कैन मेक मिस्टेक्स. कोई भी गलती कर सकता है. नाउ स्टूडेंट्स, लेट्स लर्न द यूसेज ऑफ कुड. Could is also used for ability to do something but in the past. For example, he could swim when he was 5. जब वो 5 साल का था तो तैर सकता था. कैन हम लगाते हैं सकता है, सकती है के लिए और कुड लगाते हैं सकता था, सकती थी, सकते थे. Point number 2, permission to do something in the past. For example, I could go to the cinema. Polite question, for example, could I go to the cinema please? Polite request, could you switch on the fan please? Polite offer, I could lend you my car till tomorrow. Polite suggestion, could we visit grandma at the weekend? Possibility, anyone can make mistakes. Anyone could make mistakes. Narration. Now students, when we were studying reported speech, there we have learned that can changes into could. For example, she said that she could bake a cake. So that time can changes into could. Next modal verb is may. May expresses possibility. For example, it may rain today. So may shows strong possibility. Number 2, permission to do something in the present, but in a formal way. For informal, we use can. For formal way, when you are talking to your teachers, in the office, to the elders, in a formal manner. For example, may I go to drink water? Polite suggestion, may I help you? It is also used to express wish or blessing. जब हम किसी को कोई आशीर्वाद दे रहे होते हैं. For example, may you win a scholarship. May his soul rest in peace. So यहाँ हम दूसरे के लिए दुआ कर रहे हैं कि उसकी आत्मा को शांति मिले. Next use is purpose. For example, he is working hard so that he may crack the examination. वो हार्ड वर्क कर रहा है. हार्ड वर्क करने का पर्पस क्या है? उसे एग्जामिनेशन क्रैक करना है, एग्जामिनेशन में पास होना है. Now students, next modal verb is might. Let us learn uses of might. Might also expresses possibility, but it is less possible than may. For example, it might rain today. So when we use might, that time the possibility is less. But if we use may, then possibility is more. She might forgive him. Number 2, hesitant offer. For example, might I help you? Guess. That might be the postman. Or she might be her sister. यहाँ हम guess लगा रहे हैं बिना देखे. Now students, next modal verb is shall. Shall with the first person, that is I or we, is used to express simple future. For example, I shall be there by 8 a.m. So this you have learnt in future tense also. Number 2, shall when used with second and third person, that is you, he, she, they, it is used to express command. For example, he shall report for duty tomorrow. To express a threat, for example, you shall be fined if you park your vehicle here again. C point, to express a promise. For example, you shall have iPhone 12. So it's a promise. In interrogative sentences, shall is used with first person to express an offer, request, advice or suggestion. For example, shall we go for a picnic? Shall I bring you another cup of tea? So these are the uses of shall. Next modal, should. Now you know should is the past tense of shall. It is used, number 1, to denote past tense of shall in indirect speech. When you convert direct to indirect, shall changes into should. For example, I said that they should report for duty on Monday. Should is used to express duty or advice. For example, you should remove your shoes when you visit a temple. So, one more example, you should visit your dentist at least twice a year. Advice. Point number 3, to express purpose. For example, run slow lest you should fall down. धीरे दौड़ो नहीं तो आप गिर जाओगे. We took a taxi so that we shouldn't miss the flight. हमने टैक्सी ली. क्यों ली? उसका पर्पस क्या था? ताकि हमारी फ्लाइट मिस ना हो. To show assumption or inference. For example, he should have come by now. हम assume कर रहे हैं कि अब तक उसे आ जाना चाहिए, वो आ चुका होगा. To express probability, for example, should they play well, they will win. अगर वो अच्छे से खेलेंगे तो जीत जाएंगे. Now students, next modal verb is will. Will with the second and third person is used to express simple future. For example, he will leave for Canada tomorrow. Will with the first person is used to express wish, request, demand, or order. And will is less polite than would. For example, will you please shut the door? Prediction or assumption. For example, I think it will rain on Friday. So it's a prediction कि Friday को बारिश होगी. Promise or intention. For example, I will stop smoking. So it's a promise. It's my intention that I want to stop smoking. D. Spontaneous decision. Can somebody drive me to the station? I will. Habits. She is strange. She will sit for hours without talking. Voluntary action or willingness. I will make dinner tonight. So this is willingness कि आज रात का खाना मैं बनाऊंगी. Would. Would is the past tense of will. It is used to denote past tense of shall or will in indirect speech. When we convert from direct to indirect speech, will changes into would. She said that she would buy me a gift. To express habitual activity in the past. Past में जो काम आप बारी बारी करते थे, आपकी आदत थी. For example, she would go to the temple at sunrise. To express request, and when we are making request using would, it is more polite than will. For example, would you like to have coffee? To express a wish, would that I were a king. काश मैं एक राजा होता. To express a preference, I would rather die than beg. मैं भीख मांगने के बजाय मरना पसंद करूंगा. So preference. To express improbable or unreal condition. If I win a lottery, I would go round the world. अगर मैं लॉटरी जीतता हूं तो मैं पूरी दुनिया की सैर करूंगा. So it is improbable or unreal condition. ना आपने लॉटरी जीती है और ना वो रियलिटी में है. Must. Must refers to the present or the future tense. Must is used to denote compulsion. For example, soldiers must obey the orders of their officer. So it is a compulsion. If they don't obey, they will have to face some consequence. He must see a doctor. उसे डॉक्टर से जरूर मिलना चाहिए. अगर नहीं मिलेगा तो उसकी हालत बिगड़ जाएगी. So it is a compulsion. Point number 2, to denote certainty or strong belief. All must die sooner or later. It is certain. He must have reached by now. अब तक वो जरूर पहुंच चुका होगा. To denote determination. For example, I must see you again before I leave for Mumbai. I must go now, whatever happens. To express duty or a very strong obligation. For example, we must practice virtue. It is our duty. A teacher must teach moral values to his students. So it is an obligation. To denote possibility or inference, the principal must be in her office. Possibility. Now students, next modal is ought to. Ought refers to present, past or future tense. It is not as forceful as must, but it is stronger than should. It is used in the same sense as should. So should and ought to can be used interchangeably because they convey the same sense. And ought is followed by a to infinitive. Ought is used to denote the sense of duty or moral obligation. We ought to help the poor and the needy. We ought to love our nation. So the sense of moral obligation forces from within. There is no outside or external force or compulsion. To denote strong probability. For example, she ought to pass this time. To give advice, you ought to come in time. आपको समय पर पहुंचना चाहिए. With have, it refers to a past obligation which is unfulfilled. अगर आप ought के बाद have यूज कर देते हो, उस टाइम आप अपनी कोई past obligation की बात कर रहे होते हो जो पूरी नहीं हुई. You ought to have completed this assignment by now. इसका मतलब ये assignment अभी तक unfulfilled है, अभी complete नहीं हुआ. Next modal is dare. Dare means have the courage to do something and can behave either as a modal verb or as a main verb. As a modal verb, dare is used in negative and interrogative sentences. It is followed by a bare infinitive. For example, I daren't think how many victims there are. How dare she criticize us? Dare as a main verb can be followed by a bare infinitive or a to infinitive. For example, do you dare tell him what happened to his wife? Or do you dare to tell him what happened to his bike? Who dares argue with me? Or who dares to argue with me? He didn't dare to look back. No one would have dared to think about it. But in the expression, don't you dare, it is always followed by a bare infinitive. That is first form of verb. For example, don't you dare interrupt me. Next modal is need. Need is a semi-modal verb because in some ways it is like a modal verb and in other ways like a main verb. We use need mostly in the negative form to indicate that there is no obligation or necessity to do something. For example, you needn't take off your shoes. He needn't buy a car. Question form. The question form of the semi-modal need is not very common. It is rather formal. The subject and need change position to form questions. We don't use do, does or did. For example, need I go there? Need we write this down? And not do we need write this down? Now students, next modal verb is has to or have to. Has to and have to are used to express some compulsion, necessity or obligation in the present or future tenses. The expression had to is the past tense of has to and have to and serves the same function. For example, Rajendra has to finish his work on time. I have to withdraw money from the bank. In negatives and questions, have to and had to are used with do, does and did. They don't have to worry about food. She doesn't have to finish the drawing. Prem didn't have to go for past. Now students, let us see the usage of have to and has to. Have to has the similar meaning to must but implies less urgency. For example, I have to leave now. He has to study hard. Alex has to go by 6 p.m. In general, have to expresses impersonal obligation. The subject of have to is obliged or forced to act by a separate external power. For example, the law or school rules. Have to is objective. Now look at these examples. In France, you have to drive on the right. In England, most school children have to wear a uniform. John has to wear a tie at work. Now let us see how to use has to and have to. Have to is used with I, you, we, they in affirmative sentences. For example, you have to work hard. आपको सख्त मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी. Has to is used with he, she, it in affirmative sentences. For example, he has to cook his own meals. Negatives and questions are formed both ways, that is with or without do. Don't have to is used with I, you, we, they in negative sentences. For example, you haven't to work hard or you don't have to work hard. Doesn't have to is used with he, she, it. For example, he hasn't to cook his own meals or he doesn't have to cook his own meals. Questions. For questions, we use do or does plus subject plus have to. For example, has he to cook his own meals or does he have to cook his own meals? Now students, had to. Had to is used to express necessity or obligation in the past. For example, the villagers had to use kerosene lamps 10 years ago. Past में जो काम करना पड़ता था. As a child, I had to go to school on foot. He had to move the almirah himself. I had to get up early. मुझे जल्दी उठना पड़ता था. So it was a necessity. Negative sentences. I did not have to get up early. Question. Did I have to get up early? Now students, next modal is used to. We use this expression to talk about habits or repeated actions in the past which we don't do in the present. जो काम हम past में करते थे और अब नहीं करते हैं. We also use it to talk about states in the past which are no longer true. For example, I used to have long hair. It means now I have short hair. Past में मेरे लंबे बाल हुआ करते थे पर अब नहीं है, अब छोटे हैं. He used to smoke. इसका मतलब वो स्मोक किया करता था और अब नहीं करता. There used to be a theater near this mall. इस मॉल के पास थिएटर हुआ करता था. इसका मतलब अब नहीं है. He used to be a cashier in this bank. इसका मतलब अब वो यहाँ कैशियर नहीं है. So students, I hope you would have understood the use of modal verbs. Now here is a practice exercise for you. Fill in the blanks in the following sentences with appropriate modals. You can use will, shall, would, should, can, could, may or might. So please solve this exercise, keeping in view all the rules you have learned. Now here a question for editing. So here you are given a paragraph. In each line there is one error. First you have to write the incorrect word and then write the correction. So here one example is given to you. So please solve it. Now students, here you can find the answers to lecture 4. I hope you would have completed your exercise. Please pick up your homework notebook and check your answers. So here you can find answers to lecture 4, question number 2. Please match your answers. Now students, since this is the final lecture on modal verbs, that's why I have given answers to lecture 5 here. So after solving the exercise, please check your answers here. So here you can find answers to editing. Students, thank you very much for listening to my video. And for more such videos, kindly subscribe my channel. Please do not forget to press the bell icon for the latest updates. So please like, comment and share my videos with your friends. Thank you very much.